André Rieu has been the beating heart of a kinder world for decades, the living echo of waltzes that restored hope to the lonely and mended wounded hearts. Like a delicate and timeless silver thread of light, his violin has flowed through the ages. At one point, he brought millions of people to tears under Maastricht's stars, when tears and laughter blended into a single tune. However, behind the elegant bow and that recognizable smile is a guy who has fought the most important struggle of his life, the struggle for equilibrium itself. Once, the stage he loved became a maelstrom he could no longer manage as a concealed sickness snatched the ground beneath his feet. Since then, every performance has been a silent battle against fatigue, lightheadedness, and the eerie worry that one misstep could put an end to the music forever. Keep your eyes on him, since what he is going through right now might be the most delicate moments of his life. Please leave a like below as a silent homage to the musician who transformed suffering into melody and stillness into love. If his music has ever elevated you when the world seemed hopeless. Some hearts have fissures that are too big for childhood to patch. On October 1, 1949, André Leon Marie Nicolola Rieu was born in Maastricht, a sleepy Dutch city that still bears the subtle scars of post-war Europe. Church bells that tempted to silence the ghosts, and cobblestones that evoked memories of marching boots. Although his family was well-respected, well-off, and never impoverished, the atmosphere in their house was less breathable than love. Even though his father, André Rieu Sr., was a renowned conductor who could command an orchestra to thunder, his own son never showed him any affection. His mother, Katharina, operated their house like a score, airless, precise, and clean. It was discipline, not tenderness, that characterized the Rieu household. Except for the human heart, everything was in order. André would later remember, not with resentment but with honesty, that my parents didn't love me. That isn't an emotion, it's a fact. He was one of 6 children, 3 brothers and 2 sisters, all of whom were centered around a guy who could bring tears to the eyes of strangers but never make his own family laugh. Their dinners were practiced, courteous, and silent. There was silence. Not a single hand went up in consolation. Law was his father's perfection. Its enforcer was his mother's silence. When he was younger, André would sit by himself and try to get attention by imitating his father's conducting with a pencil in place of a baton. He wasn't. With a single glance, his father disregarded his desire of becoming a musician, which was one of joy rather than slumber. Joy was childlike, and passion was unprofessional in his view. No amount of adulation could ever completely mend the crack that moment created in André's soul. He subsequently remarked, "I learned early that approval is never warmer than love, but it can be louder than love." When he first picked up a violin at age 6, it felt much too large for his tiny hands. It was hunger, not fear, that made the bow tremble, desire for sound, warmth, and a life that seems alive. On some evenings the cold made his fingertips sting, but since the only evidence he could still sense was pain, he continued. After supper, his father's footsteps would fade down the corridor, and the house would become quiet. André would play to the darkness in that silence, a timid youngster attempting to use wood and strings to find solace. It wasn't only drill. It was a matter of survival. He famously remarked, "The only friend who listened to me was the violin. He can still smell the scent of candlelight and resin, the way the strings tried to stay alive by vibrating against his ribcage like a heartbeat." Early on, he discovered that although the heart is barely hanging on, the body can stand upright, a reality that would eventually reverberate in his music as well as his health, as fatigue and imbalance plagued him in his senior years. In the late 1960s, André also encountered no warmth at the Royal Conservatory in Brussels. The fragrance of ambition and varnish filled the halls. The technique was messed up, feelings were mocked. Instead of praising emotion, teachers praised perfection. Decades later, he observed quietly, "Those were years of invisible bruises. You are shaped by invisible wounds." An orchestra that would swing, smile, and enjoy life was his goal, and his peers made fun of him for that goal. Some academics advised him to cease pursuing immature notions of happiness and to mature. André, however, had already started his silent revolt. He had no desire to switch the music. As he listened to it, he wished to alter the experience of being human. Beneath the gentleness of his melodies, André's conviction had solidified like steel by the middle of the 1970s. He wanted to play for something more, a connection, after years of performing for other people. He assembled a small group of musicians who continued to believe that music might heal at the age of 29 in 1978 without the support of family, a financial safety net, or the prospect of success. The Maastricht Salon Orchestra began as a small rehearsal room in Maastricht. It was his first silent act of rebellion against centuries of inflexible custom. The laughing in those rooms was genuine, and that was sufficient, even though the early performances were brief and the halls were drafty. Standing next to him was Marjorie, the woman who had faith in him when it seemed impossible to trust. There was strong opposition to their love. The final tenuous link to his birthplace was severed when his mother declined to marry them. André later acknowledged that it was like losing a part of himself, but I was free because of that anguish. His independence was born out of that wound. He had changed from being a son pleading for acceptance. He was an artist, creating a space for love to flourish. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word. He responded with a sorrowful smile when asked if he had ever forgiven his parents decades later. Those early performances in small rooms and village squares became the purest manifestation of his personality. I just learned to play through the silence. He wasn't acting, he was recovering. Every note was a tiny act of rebellion against the icy world he had been raised in. He claimed that although I wasn't born with warmth, I made the decision to do so. By turning rejection into beauty, quiet into connection, and a shattered upbringing into a legacy that would one day make the entire world dance, André Rieu started to reinvent what classical music could mean. André Rieu was on the verge of making the most audacious jump of his life in 1987, following years of rejection, heartache, and exhaustion. He was going to start over at the age of 38, when most guys were slowing down. His hands, the same hands that shook in the quiet of childhood, now carried a dream that was strong enough to alter everything, but brittle enough to shatter. Many people criticized him for being risky when he chose to start the Johann Strauss Orchestra with just 12 players. As a romantic dreamer pursuing a delusion, he was scorned by the classical elite. They muttered, "He's trying to make classical music smile." André's ambition, however, remained unwavering. In order for music to live, laugh, and captivate listeners once more, he sought to liberate it from the icy stone of tradition. Later, he would remember with a tired smile, "They said I was mad. However, I would rather die happy than flawless." Far from the glitz that viewers today witness, the early years were arduous. Like hesitant applause, money came in. Not enough to sleep. Not nearly enough to go on. Each performance was a risk. Each tour is an endurance challenge. He put all of his energy into surviving, selling, taking out a loan, paying it back, and beginning afresh. On some evenings, he performed on stages so frigid that his fingers went numb in the middle of his performance. He would forego meals on some nights in order to pay his musicians first. His body started to object. Despite experiencing vertigo episodes, shaking hands, and an incessant ringing in his ears from countless rehearsals, he persisted. He claimed that there were times when the floor seemed to vanish and the lights flashed before my eyes. But I stood because of the music. He appeared on stage at their first significant performance on January 1, 1988. 12 artists, one shaky hope. The clapping was deafening, and the performance was amazing. But after the lights went down, he sat backstage, shaking, his pulse pounding, his hands hurting, and the ledger still crimson. He understood that a dream could not be nourished by applause. The numbers hardly worked in some months. His crew depended on him for both art and income, and instruments needed to be repaired. Travel expenses also increased. After performances, he would stroll through icy streets with his coat drawn tight, thinking to himself, "One more miracle, one more concert." He once counted pennies by lamplight till dawn in a tiny hotel room, his reflection in the glass looking hollow and colorless. During his first performance, fatigue occasionally caused him to lose his vision, yet his bow never wavered. Yes, it shook, but it didn't shatter. "I'll at least have fallen in music if I fall," he once assured himself if he did. Sweat and tears blended together under the stage lights, like a lifeline pulled against gravity. His bow glistened. The audience cheered for daring rather than perfection when he grinned through the fuzz. Decades later, André looks back on those years as revelations rather than struggles. In his 70s, he said, "I don't remember the debts. I recall the smiles on the faces of those who watched me play. I knew it was worth every bruise because of that." Painfully, slowly, the seeds bloomed. City after city, the ideal that had seemed unattainable started to sing back to him, and laughter took the place of uncertainty. The imbalance that would eventually almost ruin his career had already started, even though he was unaware of it at the time. Nevertheless, he persisted because to him, happiness was never the absence of pain. It was what made it through. Once hollow, the applause now sounded like life itself. Not evidence of celebrity, but that even the tired may inspire others. His music would never falter, even if his body did. André Rieu's unwavering perseverance started to pay off by the mid-1990s, though not in the carefree, glamorous manner that some people envision when they hear the term global fame. Sleepless years, personal debt, and the silent pain of a man with too many dreams on one pair of shoulders shaped his rise. The pivotal moment occurred in 1995 when, during a UEFA Champions League game, he performed Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2, causing a stadium full of tens of thousands to become silent in shock before erupting into an almost biblical roar of ovation. Throughout the night, his music swept spanning continents. The world, however, was blind to the weariness that lay beneath the grin. After nights when he hardly slept, plagued by logistics, ticket sales, and the worry that his orchestra may fail due to its own desire, he gave that one performance, which turned him into a star. He said, "That night changed my life. However, it also signaled the start of my biggest challenge to maintain that flame without setting myself on fire." From that point on, Rieu's life was a haze of stages, airports, and rehearsals. He traveled the world performing his waltzes with his orchestra, from Europe's cobblestone streets to the enormous venues in America, Asia, and Australia. Indeed, the excursions were breathtaking, but beneath the beauty lay an empire that engulfed him. He was more than just a painter. He was the financier, the producer, and the guardian of over 100 lives. The weight of the responsibilities felt oppressive. While performing every night as though there were no responsibilities, he oversaw marketing, insurance, payroll, travel, and rehearsals. He did not wear a crown that read King of Waltz. He was carrying a burden. On stage, every bow stroke was a compromise with exhaustion. On certain nights, the music notes seemed to hover like ghosts in the glare of the stage lights, and his vision became blurry from tiredness. He still grinned. But he played. He acknowledged that there were occasions when I bowed and my arms were scarcely perceptible, but the crowd restored my power. Rieu had established an autonomous musical empire by the early 2000s, something that very few musicians in history have ever accomplished. He oversaw every aspect, including logistics, promotion, and recording. In his hometown of Maastricht, he constructed his own recording studio so he could have complete control over every sound. Every choice was a risk. Some nearly wrecked him, while others paid off magnificently. His productions became enormous in scope. Tens of thousands of tickets per tour, hundreds of employees, and millions of dollars in logistics. He almost went bankrupt in 2009 due to unforeseen cancellations and medical exhaustion. In a matter of months, over $15 million disappeared, but his faith remained unwavering despite the declining numbers. Later, he said, "I wasn't sleeping. I was figuring out how to save everyone who was dependent on me, not how much money I could make." His resolve turned into both his illness and its remedy. Nevertheless, André never sacrificed the core of his vision, even in the midst of chaos. His assets revealed a man who built for protection rather than prosperity. His employees, instruments, and songs were all kept in dozens of properties in Maastricht alone. Priceless violins and costumes were transported across borders by his fleet of trucks. To keep his musicians healthy, his chefs prepared meals. He even constructed a nursery for his performers' kids. Not every choice or euro spent was a luxury. It was labor masquerading as love. He famously remarked, "My orchestra is my family." He was all sparkle to the world. And you don't abandon family. Gowns, chandeliers, and laughter under the stars. However, behind the scenes were the taxing rehearsals, the frail body battling fatigue and aging, and the never-ending risky ledgers. Though it was based on silent endurance and restless nights, his smile was genuine. André Rieu was extremely wealthy at the time he took on the world stage, one of the most lucrative independent music empires in history, with over 80 properties and an estimated net worth of $600 million. But to him, survival, rather than wealth, was the true victory. "People see the beauty, but they don't see the pain," he remarked quietly. "Both make me proud." He discovered that adversity is not a prerequisite for greatness. It is its symphony. Now, every note he plays echoes the realization that beneath every glittering waltz, there is a heartbeat that has experienced faith, exhaustion, and failure. Even if his physical condition has deteriorated over time, his music has not. Evidence that the spirit can dance even when the body trembles. André Rieu's castle and his 2 Stradivarius violins are among his numerous valuables, but none have the same vitality, memory, and fragility. They are considered possessions by most. For him, they are representations of the spirit and body that sustained his music over many years of rebirth and fatigue. There was more to Moustri's 15th century castle than just stone and grandeur. It was there that he first sat at a piano as a weak youngster and discovered the healing power of sound. It was a sign of survival rather than pride when he eventually purchased it in 1999 following decades of touring and exhaustion. He once remarked, "I wanted a place where my heart could rest while the world continued to spin." Restoring the castle turned into a therapeutic exercise. He was reconstructing himself, brick by brick. The castle evolved into more than just a house. Each hallway he illuminated and each garden he restored seemed to whisper, "You are still here." It developed into a live being. The coldness of hotel rooms was replaced by the sunlight-filled glass conservatory. When his lungs grew tired from all the flights and practices, the tropical garden provided some fresh air. Inside its confines, he established a recording studio not simply for business, but for refuge. He would withdraw there, bow in hand, allowing music to flow through him like medication on days when his strength and balance failed. He once thought, "It's odd how silence can both heal and hurt you at the same time." When his body failed to bring him back to rhythm, the silence of the castle did. His 2 Stradivarius violins, one from 1667 and the other from 1732, were equally revered. Centuries' worth of fingerprints were visible in their wood. The ghost of history was in their tone. They were extensions of Rieu's own heartbeat rather than instruments. "I feel time breathing when I hold them," he added. Yet even these gems became part of his burden. The burden of responsibility almost brought him down during the gloomy months of the 2020 epidemic, when everything came to a halt and quiet descended like ash. The concerts stopped. Revenue stopped. He was still required by his family and orchestra though. He pondered selling one of the Stradivarius violins to pay their salaries. The concept alone broke him. He subsequently acknowledged that it would have been like selling a part of his soul, but he never did. Somehow the music lingered, even in silence. The castle and violins are seen by outsiders as symbols of luxury. To André Rieu, they are proof of perseverance, of a body and soul that refused to crumble. When his lungs weaken, his music continues to breathe in the castle. When his hands shake, his heart still sings on the violins. They are his anatomy altogether, his living pulse transformed into sound. They remind me that even the finest instruments, like the human heart, must be tuned repeatedly if you want them to continue singing, he adds, with smile, when people ask him what they mean. André Rieu experienced a sort of stillness in 2020 that no stage could have prepared him for. A hush so great and so cruel that it seemed to obliterate his heartbeat itself. His days had been a hallowed beat for decades. Practice, Tour, applause, repeat. Every bow stroke and tone had contributed to the great inexorable symphony of life. The music ceased in what seemed like a single, brutal, silent moment. The pandemic raced over continents like a cyclone that spared no theater. All the concerts disappeared from his schedule. Every hall's lights went out. The man who used to fill stadiums and cathedrals with his violin now stood in an echoless universe. The applause that had been his heartbeat for half a century was replaced by the unsettling stillness of empty rooms. This new silence felt almost surgical to a guy who had before endured loneliness, bereavement, and tiredness. Quieter, it cut deeper. However, he didn't think of himself first. It was of the 100 humans whose livelihoods depended on him. The tailor, drivers, technicians, and musicians who had made his music their livelihood. Determining that not a single one of them would be left to drift, André dug into the reserves he had spent a lifetime creating while borders closed and ticket sales crashed. His accounts dwindled month after month as the globe fell silent. At night, the numbers taunted him, red ink lines that became hazy in weary eyes. He sold tidbits of his history, including a prized old car, a portion of an old investment, and silent sacrifices that were never mentioned out loud. And as the silence deepened, he saw that he was standing in front of his 1732 Stradivarius, his most treasured friend. It had sang with him through pain and victory for decades. It was unimaginable to sell it, but he did. "Maybe it's time," he whispered once, "if it will rescue them." The fact that he could think of it spoke more than words could, but he never sold it. He was losing money, not wealth. Piece by piece, it was breath. The air became silent within his castle, which had previously been alive with singing and joy. There was no damage to the recording studio. Once resonating with melody, the passageways now murmured with recollection as violins slumber in their cases. Alone with himself, he traced the contours of the world he had created, listening to the ghosts of melodies past in every quiet. The world shuddered in terror outside. The man who once made millions dance, André Rieu, had to confront his own frailty inside. In that alone, he started writing again. He later remarked quietly, "When you are forced to stop, you understand what music truly means. Every note becomes a gift, every silence a lesson. Deeper, slower music that hurts with thankfulness. No longer were the notes performances, they were supplications." His bow shook with humility rather than weariness. The understanding that music and life can both disappear in an instant. After more than a year, it seemed sacrosanct when the globe reopened and he took the stage once more. The cheers that greeted him were gentle rather than booming. The collective exhalation of 1,000 hearts. Some sobbed in public, their personal sorrows mirrored in his facial expressions. The echo of the protracted silence was present in every waltz that evening. The grins were more brittle, the crescendos weaker. There is a whisper of survival in every bow and stroke. Under the lights there was a guy who had been reborn, not merely the king of waltz, one who had experienced loneliness, fear, and the silent breakdown of all he held dear and discovered that music still has life even when it is silenced. He also does. The most agonizing stillness a musician can experience comes from within himself, not from the audience. The most agonizing stillness a musician can experience comes from within himself, not from the audience. After decades of restless flights and never-ending tours that blended together, André Rieu faced a storm in 2010 that no amount of adulation could quell. The earth underneath him became a moving sea as a nasty virus infiltrated his inner ear and stole his equilibrium like a nighttime thief. After a lifetime of leading orchestras, the guy now struggled to lead his own limbs. One by one, concerts that had been planned for months vanished. Fans who were devastated wrote from all over the world. Their prayers were piled high in their letters. Like faded flowers, their messages of optimism were sandwiched between pages. The King of Waltz, however, was reduced behind the curtain to a shaky figure clutching his own house's walls in order to remain upright. Vertigo, nausea, and lightheadedness. Every day is a haze of recalcitrant breathing and spinning walls. The forced silence, a sort of living silence, was agony for a guy who was defined by activity. Dawns extended into nights. The beat of his footsteps reverberated through the halls like a metronome counting time against despair as he paced the dim hallways of his home, bow in hand whispering, "I must come back. They need me." At times his own reflection wavered in the window glass, and the room appeared to tilt beneath him. But he was unyielding. He discovered during those restless hours that healing was an act of endurance, one shaky breath at a time, rather than a miracle. Recovery and a heartbreak that no medication could heal were part of the years that followed. Just as his body was regaining equilibrium in 2016, fate took a different turn. His closest buddy and trombonist, Ruud Merckx, unexpectedly passed out in the middle of a tour. Their tiny dressing room was filled with laughing one day. Then there was quiet. As usual, André took the stage that evening, but the music shook with absence. The lights blazed colder, and the applause sounded hollow. Every waltz became an elegy, every note an appeal to heaven. Later, as his voice cracked under the memory, he admitted that it was like losing a limb. There was a single bar of silence before he took the stage. Never revealed, never justified, but always impolite. He kept his companion alive in that delicate interlude between notes. Love became his endurance, pain his prayer, and he lost his rhythm. Decades of overcoming fatigue and gravity had taken their toll. By 2024, 40,000 hearts waited outside the curtain in Mexico under a burning sky, ready to give them everything again. He lifted his bow. Then the earth began to tilt. The floor surged up to meet him as he felt a hollow ringing in his ears and a burst of brightness. The crowd's scream turned into a far-off hum. The stage crew screamed. With their flashlights piercing the stage's gold haze, paramedics rushed into the wings. As they hoisted him onto a stretcher, the warm warmth of the concert changed to sterile white. The world shrank to the sound of heart monitors and Marjorie's quivering voice next to him as his breathing became shallow. Under the glare, his eyes were glassy as he murmured, "I never want another opening night like this." He lay still that night in a pitch-black hotel room, the stillness weighing down on his chest. Dozens of texts flashed on the bedside table phone, unanswered, family, friends, and fans. He wondered if the curtain had fallen permanently as he gazed at the ceiling and counted the steady cadence of his own pulse. He decided to rise with the lovely light of dawn as it eventually broke through the window. This time, recovery was hard. He was cautioned by his physicians. The body heals a little more slowly each year. But he retaliated, inch by inch. Because in the end, André Rieu's true legacy is not measured in accolades or applause, but in the unseen lives he has lifted. The widower who smiled again, the lonely who felt less alone, the elderly who found the courage to continue dancing. He knows the curtain will fall someday, but not just yet, not while his heart is still beating in waltz time. Even a single word of gratitude is a note in André's eternal symphony. His life serves as a reminder that the truest music is not what we hear, but what we feel. The will to keep breathing, to keep loving, to keep believing in beauty, no matter how heavy the years become. If André's melodies have ever brought you back to joy or carried you through grief, leave your tribute below. And as you listen tonight, keep in mind that you still have music in you, no matter where you are or how exhausted your heart is. May you live your own waltz in good health, tranquility, and the silent wealth of a life well loved.